The cries of a newborn echoed through the cold, dimly lit room. The air was heavy with an almost suffocating silence, broken only by the sound of the baby's fragile voice. Her hand shook as she cut the cord. Her breath quickened, her chest tightening as the reality of what she was doing settled in. The small, helpless life in her arms barely made a sound, and she could feel the weight of its innocence. For a fleeting moment, a wave of guilt crashed over her. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. She didn't have time to feel. Not now. This wasn't her first birth. She'd given life before, but this was different. The room felt colder now, emptier. She wrapped the baby in a thin, threadbare blanket, her movements mechanical. Everything was calculated, every action, every second. She couldn't afford to hesitate. She couldn't afford to show any weakness. The deal had been made weeks ago. She had promised, and now she would deliver. But as she placed the baby into the small, waiting basket, something stirred inside her. The weight of what she had just done began to claw at her conscience, digging into her mind, but she suppressed it, pushing the thoughts away. There was no turning back now. A door opened, and a man entered. His presence was as cold as the room. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes were empty, no warmth, no compassion. His hand reached out to take the baby, and she placed the child into his arms without a word. She felt numb. Her mind was a blur. The room, the baby, the man, everything seemed distant now. As though it was happening to someone else. It wasn't her life, it wasn't her reality. The man didn't even glance at the baby as he held it in his arms. He didn't offer a single word of acknowledgement. His expression remained unchanged, emotionless. He was a stranger, and she had never seen him before in her life. But he was here for a reason. She was here for a reason. She had agreed to this, and now the transaction was complete. He handed her a small envelope. The exchange was silent, but the weight of the money inside felt like a heavy burden in her hands. This was her payment, the price of her decision. She didn't open the envelope. She didn't need to. The man turned and left without a word, and the door clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone in the silence. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the floor. The room was spinning, and her chest tightened with panic. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, and she pressed her hands against her face, trying to stop the tears that threatened to fall. But she couldn't cry. She couldn't afford to. There was no time for grief. There was no time for remorse. She had made her choice, and it was done. The baby was gone. The money was in her hands. What happened next would change everything. Weeks earlier, her life had been different. She had been a woman full of hope, dreams, and aspirations. But that had all crumbled in an instant. She had never imagined that. A single moment could change everything. But one moment had led to another, and soon, she found herself in this room, doing something she never thought she was capable of. Her past had been filled with hardship. Her childhood had been hard, marked by struggle and pain. But she had learned to survive. She had fought for every small victory. She had dreams of a better life, dreams of success, of happiness, of freedom from the chains that bound her. But life had a different plan. As the years went on, her dreams seemed to slip further and further away, until one day, they were gone entirely. The struggle to keep going became too much. She had faced hardships before, poverty, loneliness, heartache. But nothing prepared her for what was to come. She had met him 2 years ago. A man who seemed to offer a way out. He had made promises, promises of money, a better life, freedom. But she had never expected the cost of those promises would be so high. It started with small favors. He asked for her help with little things, promises of compensation for her time. She agreed. It seemed harmless at first. But slowly, the favors grew bigger. They became more dangerous, more morally ambiguous. And eventually, the favor turned into something far darker. The man had come to her with an offer she couldn't refuse. She didn't know what he wanted, not exactly. But he had told her that she could make money, more money than she had ever dreamed of, if she agreed to a simple arrangement. It sounded simple enough: give birth to a child, and hand it over after. He had made it clear that the baby wouldn't be raised by her. The deal was cold, clinical, and final. There would be no connection. No questions. She had hesitated. She had questioned her decision, but the temptation of money, the promise of a way out, was too strong. She had agreed. The price of her freedom was steep, but it seemed worth it at the time. What she hadn't known was that the truth was far darker than she could have ever imagined. The man's name was never spoken aloud. She didn't even know who he worked for, what organization he was tied to, or the extent of his power. All she knew was that he had been a constant presence in her life. He had made things happen when they needed to. He had helped her when she had nowhere else to turn. But now, as she sat in that cold, empty room, staring at the door where the man had just left, the reality began to sink in. She wasn't free. Not yet. What had she done? Her mind raced as she replayed the events in her head. She had given birth to a child, a living, breathing human being. She had handed that life over to someone else, someone she didn't know. What had happened to that baby? Where was it going? Who was going to raise it? The questions piled up. The guilt, the confusion, it was all too much to bear. But the answers were just out of reach. And soon, she would learn that the truth was far more complicated than she could ever imagine. The phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. She wiped her eyes and stood, steadying herself against the wall as she reached for the receiver. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling. "It's done," a voice on the other end said, cold and emotionless. "The deal has been completed." She felt her heart drop. She wanted to ask questions. She wanted to scream. But she couldn't. The words wouldn't come. "Your payment will be transferred. The money is yours. You'll never have to worry about anything again," the voice continued. "But remember, this is just the beginning." The call ended, and the silence in the room seemed to stretch for hours. She had sold her child. She had betrayed everything she had ever believed in. And there was no turning back. The truth was out there. And soon, it would be uncovered. But it was a truth far darker, far more twisted than she could have ever imagined. What had she become? And what would happen when the world found out what she had done? As she stood alone in the empty room, the weight of her choices pressed down on her. There was no escape. No redemption. Only the cold, harsh reality of what she had just done. The mystery had just begun. The phone call had shaken her to her core, but the silence after it was even worse. The tension in the room hung like thick smoke, making it hard to breathe, harder still to think. She didn't know what she had expected, but the finality of it all was suffocating. The money was hers. A promise of freedom. But at what cost? The envelope sat on the small table beside her, untouched. She had received what she had been promised, but it felt like nothing more than a cruel joke. No amount of money could undo what she had just done. No amount of money could bring the baby back. No amount of money could fill the hollow space inside her. She stood in the center of the room, staring at the envelope. Every part of her screamed to run, to tear it open, to see what was inside. But she couldn't. Not yet. She couldn't afford to let herself feel anything right now. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. No more second-guessing. No more doubts. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Far from it. The man's words echoed in her mind, "This is just the beginning." Her mind raced. What did he mean by that? What had she agreed to? The deal had been simple, or so it had seemed at the time. She would give birth, hand over the child, and walk away. No strings attached. No questions asked. But now, with the baby gone and the money in her hands, she realized how little she truly understood. Who were these people? What was their true purpose? What had they wanted with her child? And what was the man's real involvement in all of this? She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. But they kept coming back, swirling in her mind like a storm. She couldn't escape it. Not anymore. The first week after the baby was taken passed in a blur. She moved through the motions of her life, but it felt like she was living in a fog. She went to work, interacted with friends, but nothing felt real. Nothing felt like it mattered anymore. Her days were empty, filled with an ache she couldn't quite name. She had always been able to distract herself before, but now, there was no escape from the reality of her actions. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image of the baby, its innocent face, its fragile body. It was impossible to forget. But what haunted her the most was the man. The cold, emotionless figure who had taken her child from her. She had never even learned his name, and yet, he had more power over her life than anyone else. He had been the one to make the deal, the one to take the child, and the one to walk away with the life she had once hoped for. What if he came back? What if he wanted more? The idea gnawed at her until she couldn't sleep at night. She thought about calling him, asking questions, demanding answers. But every time she reached for the phone, she stopped herself. She was afraid. Afraid of what he might say. Afraid of what might happen if she pushed too hard. And then, one evening, the phone rang again. Her pulse quickened as she picked up the receiver. Hello? Her voice was trembling, barely above a whisper. It's me, the voice on the other end said. It was him. The man. Her heart skipped a beat. She felt a surge of panic rise within her chest. What did he want now? Don't hang up, he continued. I need to see you. It's time. His words were cold, detached, but there was something else, something that sent a chill down her spine. There was an urgency in his tone, a sense that whatever was coming next couldn't be avoided. She hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity, her fear, got the better of her. Where? She asked, her voice hoarse. Meet me at the same place. The old warehouse on the east side, he instructed. Don't bring anyone. Don't ask questions. Just come. The line went dead before she could respond. The air was thick with the smell of rust and old wood when she arrived at the warehouse. The building stood in a forgotten part of the city, its once sturdy walls now weathered and broken. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. It was the kind of place that felt abandoned, like no one had stepped foot there in years. She didn't want to be here, but her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the building. She had no choice. She couldn't stay away. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw him standing in the corner, his back to her. The same man, the same cold expression. You came, he said, his voice flat. I didn't have much of a choice, she replied, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. He turned to face her. No, you didn't. He walked toward her, each step deliberate. Measured. We need to talk. Her heart raced, but she didn't say anything. She simply nodded. Sit, he said, motioning to a dusty chair nearby. She obeyed, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. What was he going to tell her? What was this all about? He stood in front of her, staring down at her for what felt like an eternity. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, he said at last, his voice low. I'm also sure that you've been wondering what happens next. You've been wondering who we are, why we took the child, and what this all means. She swallowed hard. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. I need to know. Please. He sighed, the sound heavy. I'm afraid you won't like the answers. But you'll understand soon enough. A shiver ran down her spine as he continued. The child you gave us? It wasn't just a transaction. It wasn't just about money. The truth is, you've been part of something much larger than you can imagine. You've been drawn into a network of people who have a very specific purpose. Her stomach turned. She didn't like where this was going. What do you mean? What are you talking about? The child you gave us is a key, he said, his voice darkening. A key to something far more dangerous than you can understand. You're not the only one who has been involved in this. There are others like you, people who have made deals, people who have traded something precious in exchange for their own gain. She felt a cold sweat form on the back of her neck. What are you saying? She whispered. You've unwittingly become part of something much bigger, something that's been happening for years. And now, you're in deeper than you realize. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The mystery deepened as she sat in the dimly lit warehouse, her mind spinning. What had she gotten herself into? What was this network? Who were these people, and what did they want with her? The man's next words would reveal more than she ever wanted to know. This part builds the suspense by introducing new layers to the mystery, with the man revealing that the child was part of a much bigger plan. It leaves readers with more questions, ensuring that they'll be eager to continue reading and find out what happens next. The man's words echoed in her mind, each one sinking deeper, forming a web of confusion and fear she couldn't escape. She had unknowingly become a part of something. She had no idea what was truly happening. Her child had been taken as part of a much larger scheme, a puzzle that had yet to be fully revealed. She felt lost, trapped in a maze of her own making. The warehouse around her seemed to close in. The shadows on the walls shifted with every flicker of light, stretching and morphing like ghosts from another world. Who are you? She asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound confident. The man didn't respond immediately. He took a long, slow breath before walking to the far corner of the warehouse and turning his back to her. She watched him closely, waiting, her heart hammering in her chest. I thought you'd be a little more surprised, he finally said, his voice softer now, though it still carried the same coldness. But I guess it's not that surprising. People like you, they don't ever really understand what they're part of until it's too late. Her head spun. People like you. What did that even mean? Who was he talking about? I didn't sign up for any of this, she said, her hands trembling as she gripped the armrests of the chair. I didn't know what I was doing. He turned slowly to face her, his eyes cold and calculating. That's the beauty of it, he said, almost as if to himself. We don't need you to know. You don't have to understand. You just have to do what we say, and everything falls into place. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Was this a game to him? A cruel, twisted game where she was nothing more than a pawn? She had been so desperate for money, for freedom, that she hadn't even questioned the deal. She hadn't asked enough questions. She had been too focused on the immediate benefit, the quick escape. The man continued, his voice growing darker. You made your choice. And now, you're part of something much bigger than you can fathom. You're tied to this, whether you like it or not. Her mind raced as the realization set in. What had she done? She had never imagined that this would be the result. She had never imagined that her desperation would lead her to this moment. She had made the deal, handed over her child, and now there was no turning back. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about something much more dangerous. The man's eyes narrowed, watching her closely. You didn't think this was going to be easy, did you? He asked, almost mockingly. There's always a price to pay. Always a consequence. You didn't think you could walk away from something like this without repercussions, did you? She clenched her fists, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want with my baby? The man's expression darkened. He took a step closer to her, his movements deliberate, his every step measured. Your child, he said slowly, was never just a baby. It's part of a larger plan. You were just the first step. And now, you're going to help us finish what we started. Her heart skipped a beat. Help you, she echoed, the words barely leaving her mouth. I didn't agree to anything like that. The man's lips curled into a cold smile. You agreed to more than you realized. You didn't just sell us a baby. You sold us your future. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as she pushed it back. Who are you? She asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound confident. The man didn't respond immediately. He took a long, slow breath before walking to the far corner of the warehouse and turning his back to her. She watched him closely, waiting, her heart hammering in her chest. I thought you'd be a little more surprised, he finally said, his voice softer now, though it still carried the same coldness. But I guess it's not that surprising. People like you, they don't ever really understand what they're part of until it's too late. Her head spun. People like you. What did that even mean? Who was he talking about? I didn't sign up for any of this, she said, her hands trembling as she gripped the armrests of the chair. I didn't know what I was doing. He turned slowly to face her, his eyes cold and calculating. That's the beauty of it, he said, almost as if to himself. We don't need you to know. You don't have to understand. You just have to do what we say, and everything falls into place. She felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Was this a game to him? A cruel, twisted game where she was nothing more than a pawn? She had been so desperate for money, for freedom, that she hadn't even questioned the deal. She hadn't asked enough questions. She had been too focused on the immediate benefit, the quick escape. The man continued, his voice growing darker. You made your choice. And now, you're part of something much bigger than you can fathom. You're tied to this, whether you like it or not. Her mind raced as the realization set in. What had she done? She had never imagined that this would be the result. She had never imagined that her desperation would lead her to this moment. She had made the deal, handed over her child, and now there was no turning back. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about something much more dangerous. The man's eyes narrowed, watching her closely. You didn't think this was going to be easy, did you? He asked, almost mockingly. There's always a price to pay. Always a consequence. You didn't think you could walk away from something like this without repercussions, did you? She clenched her fists, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want with my baby? The man's expression darkened. He took a step closer to her, his movements deliberate, his every step measured. Your child, he said slowly, was never just a baby. It's part of a larger plan. You were just the first step. And now, you're going to help us finish what we started. Her heart skipped a beat. Help you, she echoed, the words barely leaving her mouth. I didn't agree to anything like that. The man's lips curled into a cold smile. You agreed to more than you realized. You didn't just sell us a baby. You sold us your future. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor as she pushed it back. I didn't sell my future, she said, trying to muster some courage. I just needed the money. I needed a way out. I was desperate. His eyes softened for a moment, but only for a second. Everyone is desperate, at some point, he said, his voice almost wistful. The difference between you and most people is that you were willing to do whatever it took. You had a price, and we bought it. Her stomach twisted in knots. She had been so naive. All she had wanted was a chance at a better life. She had never imagined that the cost of that life would be so high. What do you mean, my future? She asked, her voice trembling. He tilted his head, watching her with an almost unnerving calm. You see, you've been chosen, he said. Chosen for something important. You were never meant to just walk away from this. You were never meant to have a normal life again. This is bigger than you. Bigger than any of us. You're part of something, bigger than anything you could ever imagine. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of his words. Chosen? What did that mean? She had never been told that she was chosen for anything. She had never asked for any of this. She had just wanted a way out, a way to escape the life that had been weighing her down. "The child," she said, trying to steady her breathing. "What do you need the child for?" The man didn't answer right away. He walked toward the window, looking out over the dark, empty street. "You don't understand," he said softly. "But you will. Soon enough." The silence in the room was deafening as she waited for him to say more, but he remained quiet. He wasn't going to explain. Not yet. Her mind was spinning, each thought leading to more questions, but no answers. What had she gotten herself into? What was this network, and how was she involved? And why had her child been taken? Suddenly, a sharp sound broke the silence. The sound of footsteps. Rapid. The door to the warehouse creaked open, and two men stepped inside, their figures silhouetted by the dim light. "Is she ready?" one of them asked, his voice low and demanding. The man she had been talking to turned around, his cold gaze flicking between the two newcomers and her. "Yes," he replied. "She's ready." The newcomers didn't say anything else. They simply walked toward her, their eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. They had the look of people who were used to getting what they wanted, no matter the cost. Her breath caught in her throat. What were they going to do now? The man who had been speaking to her before walked up to her, standing close enough for her to feel the weight of his presence. "You're going to help us finish what we started," he said again, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have a choice anymore. You'll do what we say. And if you don't, there will be consequences." She felt a chill run through her as the weight of his words settled over her. There was no turning back now. "What do you want from me? Why are you doing this?" The man sighed, clearly irritated. "You're not going to get any answers from me right now. But you'll get them soon enough." She didn't understand. What did he mean by soon enough? What answers could there possibly be? She glanced over her shoulder, her heart hammering in her chest. The two other men, who had been silent up until now, followed closely behind her, their footsteps heavy on the concrete floor. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that she wasn't going to be given the chance to leave. Not without their say-so. The hallway twisted and turned, the narrow space making it feel like they were walking in circles. She had no idea where they were taking her, but one thing was certain, she was not walking into a meeting room or an office. There was nothing official about this place. Finally, they stopped in front of another door. This one was smaller, less imposing than the others, but it looked just as old. The man in front of her turned the knob and pushed the door open. A wave of cold air rushed over her as she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, but the shapes of various machines were visible in the corners. There was a metallic smell in the air. It felt clinical, sterile, like a place where nothing human existed. But what stood out to her the most was the table in the center of the room. It was large, flat, and made of shiny metal, surrounded by several chairs. The kind of table you might find in a laboratory. "This is where the real work happens," the man said, his voice now lower, almost conversational. "We don't have much time, so let's get to it." She didn't know what he meant by real work, but she had a sinking feeling that whatever it was going to be far worse than anything she had imagined. She tried to pull away from his grip, but he wasn't having it. "Sit down," he commanded. There was no choice. She didn't have a say in this. He forced her into one of the chairs around the table, his hand still gripping her arm with surprising strength. She sat, her mind racing. What did they want from her? She couldn't fathom why they had chosen her, why she had been part of their twisted plan. What was the deal with her baby? What role did she play in all of this? The man who had been talking to her earlier, the one who had been so distant, now stepped forward and placed a folder on the table in front of her. The thick paper was worn, and the edges of the folder were frayed. "Do you remember what you signed?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Her stomach churned. "I didn't sign anything," she replied quickly, shaking her head. I just agreed to take the money. That's all." "Wrong," he said, shaking his head slowly. You signed. You signed everything. With a sudden motion, he opened the folder and pushed a sheet of paper toward her. The bold letters on top of the document read, "Agreement for services rendered." Her eyes widened, and she took a shaky breath. The terms, written in fine print, were nearly impossible to read. But one word jumped out at her. Baby. Her pulse quickened. What was this? Go ahead, the man said with a slight smirk. Read it. Her fingers trembled as she ran her eyes over the paper. The document laid out the details of the arrangement she had never fully understood. She had signed away everything, her future, her rights, and her child. She had sold her child as though it were nothing more than a commodity. I didn't, she began, but the words died in her throat. Oh, but you did, the man replied. And now, you're here to fulfill your end of the bargain. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away. She had been a fool. She had thought she could take the money and walk away. But now she realized how wrong she had been. She was a part of something monstrous. Something she could never undo. Why did you do it? The man asked, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. Why sell your child? I didn't know, she choked out. I didn't know what I was getting into. He watched her with something resembling pity in his eyes, but it was short-lived. That's the thing, he said. You never really know what you're getting into until it's too late. The door to the room creaked open, and another man entered. This one was different. He wasn't like the others. His clothes were crisp and professional, and his presence was commanding. He stepped forward without a word, and his eyes immediately locked onto hers. His expression was cold, but there was something else there, something that made her shiver. We're ready, he said, his voice clipped. The man who had been talking to her nodded, then turned to her. This is it. The final step. The final step. What did that mean? She looked from one man to the other, panic rising in her chest. Her mind raced, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find a way out. Don't worry, the man said, his voice now almost soothing. Everything will be over soon. And just like that, she realized how deeply she had fallen into their trap. There was no turning back. The air felt heavier now. With every step they took, the walls seemed to close in around her. The cold metallic scent of the room was beginning to suffocate her, and she couldn't escape the unsettling thought that the real reason she was here was something far worse than she had ever imagined. Her heartbeat pounded in her chest. What was the final step? The man who had spoken earlier, the one with the cold, calculating eyes, was now standing across from her, his face impassive. His associates were no longer silent. One stood at the door, blocking her, but now, she was here, in this sterile, cold room, surrounded by people who held her fate in their hands. What had she done? Do you understand now? The man asked softly, leaning forward slightly. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. Understand what? She managed to say, her voice trembling. He gave a humorless smile. That you've already made the deal. That you've already sold your child. And now, you're here to pay your debt. She recoiled, instinctively pulling away from the table. Her mind refused to accept what he was saying. No. This can't be happening. I didn't sign up for this. The man's expression darkened. You did. Whether you realized it or not. He pushed a piece of paper across the table, the edge of it scraping against the surface. It was the contract she had signed. The same one she had skimmed through, not understanding the gravity of the words before her. Her hand shook as she reached for it. The text was clearer now, more menacing in the stark light of the room. Every clause, every word she had glossed over, felt like a shackle tightening around her. How could she have been so blind? You're not getting out of this, the man said coldly. And you're not going to get any sympathy from anyone here. This is your reality now. Her stomach churned, but she couldn't stop reading. The terms were terrifyingly clear now. She had signed over every right to her child. The moment the baby was born, it would no longer belong to her. The people in this room, whoever they were, would take it. They had the legal right, the binding contract. And there was nothing she could do to change that. Her thoughts whirled in panic. What had she agreed to? You'll be allowed to see your child for a short time after birth, the man continued. But once it's in their hands, that's the end of it. There's no going back. You won't get to raise it. And you won't get to make any decisions about its future. Please, no. I can't, she choked on the words, unable to speak the rest of the sentence. The man raised his hand, stopping her. The deal was made. We're not here to argue with you. We're here to finalize everything. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had no choice now. She was a pawn, trapped in a game she didn't understand. She had never known the full extent of what she had signed up for. She had thought she was just taking the money, thinking it would be the escape from the endless cycle of poverty. But now, she saw the truth. She was in too deep. Her eyes darted around the room, desperate for something, anything, to help her escape. But all she saw were cold, indifferent faces. The man in front of her didn't even blink as he watched her break down. Please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know. I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. Please, don't take my baby. The man stood, straightening his jacket. He made no move to comfort her. No sign of humanity, just the cold businesslike demeanor that had marked him from the start. It's too late for that, he said firmly. The other man, the one who had been standing near the door, walked over and laid a hand on her shoulder. His touch was unexpectedly gentle, almost reassuring. You need to accept this, he said softly. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. The words stung, but they were true. She had made a choice. A mistake, but a choice nonetheless. And now, she had to face it. The man across from her leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. This is your life now, he said, his voice low and steady. You'll have to come to terms with it. You'll live with this knowledge for the rest of your life. She shook her head, trying to make sense of everything. The deal. The money. The baby. None of it made sense anymore. She had thought she could escape, that she could find a way out. But now, she saw the reality. She had sold her future, her child's future, and there was no way to take it back. A voice in her head screamed for her to fight, to run, to do anything to get out of here. But another part of her knew that wasn't possible. She had already signed away her right to fight. And now, the consequences were catching up with her. The man who had been leading the conversation looked at his watch. We're done here, he said. You'll be taken care of. Everything has been arranged. Taken care of, she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. What does that even mean? What are you going to do with my baby? The man didn't flinch. You don't need to know that. You just need to accept it. She stood up suddenly, the chair scraping across the floor. No. I won't accept this. I won't let you take my child. But the man was already turning toward the door. His associates followed him, leaving her in the cold, sterile room, alone with the weight of her choices. As the door closed behind them, she sank to her knees. Her sobs echoed through the empty room, a hollow sound that seemed to mock her despair. She had lost everything. Her future. Her baby. And she had no idea how to fix it. The walls of the cold room seemed to press in closer, trapping her in a space she could no longer escape. Her knees were still on the floor, her hands gripping the edges of the chair as if it could hold her up. Every breath she took felt like a razor scraping against her lungs. The tears were no longer falling, there were no more left. She was numb. Empty. The weight of everything had settled deep within her chest, pulling her further into the abyss she had never expected to fall into. She had come here to escape. That was all she had ever wanted. A way out of the life that had confined her, the poverty, the struggle, the loneliness. She had thought the money, the offer, was her salvation. She had believed the lie that it would set her free. Now, all she had was a cold, sterile room, and the harsh reality that she had made a decision that could never be undone. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. She had thought it was just a contract. But the fine print, she hadn't read it. She hadn't known what she was agreeing to. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about what was best for her, it was about control. And now, they had control of everything. It wasn't just the baby. It was everything. They owned her. They owned her future. And there was no way out. The door clicked open. Her head snapped up, and for a brief moment, she thought they had come back. Her heart hammered in her chest, but when she looked up, she saw him. The man from earlier, the one who had seemed like a lifeline in the midst of all the chaos, was standing in the doorway. His presence was familiar, but there was something different about him now. Something almost regretful. "Are you okay?" His voice was softer than it had ever been, his tone almost comforting. She wiped her face quickly, trying to gather herself. There was no time for weakness, no time for emotion. But it was too late. The vulnerability had already taken root, and she couldn't stop herself from falling apart. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You're here. But why? Why are you doing this?" He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. His movements were careful, almost like he didn't want to make her feel more trapped than she already was. He sat down across from her, keeping his distance but still watching her closely. "I didn't want it to go like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to be caught in this mess." She looked at him, disbelief flooding her. "You didn't want this? Then why did you let it happen?" "I didn't have a choice." His face was tight, his eyes conflicted. "I tried to stop it, but they have all the power. All the money. They can do anything they want, and we're just pawns in their game." The words hit her harder than she expected. "You're saying, you're one of them?" He hesitated before nodding. "Yes. But not by choice. It's complicated. I didn't want to be part of it, but I needed to protect my family. I didn't have a way out." Her mind spun, struggling to make sense of what he was saying. She had always seen him as the person who could help her, someone who understood the pain of wanting to escape. But now, he was confessing that he was just as trapped as she was. "They're going to take my baby," she whispered, the tears starting to well up again. "I can't let them take my baby." He reached out and placed a hand on hers. "I know," he said quietly. "But there's nothing we can do now. Not unless you're willing to fight back. You'll need to be stronger than you've ever been before." Her breath caught in her throat. "Fight back? How?" He pulled back and stood up, pacing around the room. "It's going to be dangerous. They've covered all their tracks. But if you're willing to take that risk, there's a way out. There's a way to save your child." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do I have to do?" He stopped in his tracks and turned toward her. "You need to go to the authorities. You need to expose them. You need to make them pay for what they've done to you. To all of us." She stood up slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. "And if I do that? What happens then?" He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her, his face grim. "Then we'll both be at risk. They don't like people who expose them. They'll do whatever it takes to silence us." A chill ran down her spine. Was she really ready to face them? Was she willing to put everything on the line to fight back? Could she really expose a system this powerful, this ruthless? But then she thought about her child. Her baby. She couldn't let them take it. She couldn't let them steal her future. She had to fight. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm despite the fear rising inside her. The man nodded. "Good. I'll help you. But we need to move fast. We don't have much time. He moved to the door and looked back at her. When we do this, there's no turning back. Are you sure you're ready for that? She swallowed hard, her mind racing. But as she looked at him, something deep inside her stirred. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. She wasn't going to let them win. I'm ready. He gave a small, grim smile. Let's get to work then.